I was fired on a Friday afternoon, just when the office lights were dimming and everyone else was thinking about the weekend. They thought I would walk away quietly, just another disposable employee erased from their memory. But what they didn't know was that I had built the very system their empire relied on. And hidden inside, it was a secret they could never control. That night, while my daughter slept, and my wife asked why I always looked so defeated, I made a silent vow. By Monday morning, their proudest victory would become their greatest downfall. I had always believed that loyalty meant something. For 10 years, I had been the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave. I wrote code until my eyes burned. I stayed late enough to see the janitors turn off the lights, and I carried my laptop into weekends, while my daughter drew pictures of me at work instead of at her birthday parties. They called me dependable, tireless, the soldier you can always count on. What they didn't know was that soldiers eventually break. The company's biggest achievement was the contract management system I had built nearly single-handedly. It was sleek, fast, and airtight, or at least that's what everyone thought. A week before everything came crashing down, I discovered a flaw buried deep inside its logic. It was subtle, invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. For a long moment I stared at the screen, wondering whether to report it. If I told them, someone might blame me for the oversight, erase all the nights I had sacrificed, and label me careless. If I kept it to myself, I could fix it quietly later. That night, I closed the terminal and whispered to no one but myself, "I'll deal with it soon." Looking back now, I wonder, have you ever hidden a mistake, planning to repair it quietly, only to realize later it could become a blade pressed against your throat? At first, I still believed my dedication would shield me. In the Monday meeting, I presented an idea to streamline data validation, a feature that would save weeks of work. The room was quiet, everyone nodding. But when the report was published 2 days later, the suggestion wasn't mine anymore. It was attached to someone else's name, smooth, polished, and stripped of me. I tried to swallow it. Credit doesn't matter, I told myself. But when you've given years of your life watching your daughter grow up through the glow of a phone screen, because you're always at the office, credit becomes the only proof that the sacrifice wasn't in vain. That evening, I came home carrying a half-deflated balloon I had picked up on the street, a poor attempt to make up for missing my daughter's birthday party. She looked at me with big eyes and said, "You promised you'd come this time. You always promise, Daddy." The words cut deeper than anything my boss could ever say. At work, the tension sharpened. My closest colleague, Ryan, the one who used to grab late-night takeout with me during endless debugging sessions, suddenly stopped sitting beside me. He avoided eye contact, skipped our usual chats. Then, during a project review, I heard my own phrases, my own solutions, coming from his mouth as if they belonged to him. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the look he gave me when he noticed my shock, half shame, half defiance, told me the truth. The betrayal felt like a crack running straight through my chest. Ryan had been my only ally, the one who knew how many nights I had bled into the code. If even he had turned, then I was truly alone. Late one evening, while finishing documentation in the deserted office, I heard voices from the conference room down the hall. I almost kept walking, but something in their hushed tone pulled me closer. Through the narrow glass, I saw Ryan and Mark, the vice president, leaning over the table. Their words were muffled, but then I caught fragments that made my stomach twist. Get rid of him before the board meeting. He's done his part. We can't risk him asking questions. I froze. They were talking about me. The system I had built was about to anchor the largest contract in company history, and now that it was nearly finished, I was disposable. They wanted me gone, erased before the ink dried. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, the fluorescent hum of the hallway buzzing in my ears. For the first time, I understood the meaning of silence as a weapon. They thought I would walk away, quietly, broken and forgotten. But as I stood there, the image of my daughter's disappointed face flashing through my mind, something shifted inside me. They didn't know about the flaw. They didn't know I still held a key. And I wasn't planning on staying silent anymore. The weeks after that overheard conversation turned into a blur of exclusion. I would walk into the office, only to find meetings already underway behind closed doors. My name vanished from the agenda, my access to shared documents quietly revoked. No one said anything directly. They didn't need to. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome at the table. The people who once shared late-night coffees and nervous laughs during deadlines suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. When I tried to join a conversation, silence spread like frost until I excused myself. Even the interns, who used to look at me with admiration, avoided sitting near me in the cafeteria. Isolation is a cruel punishment. It makes you doubt your worth before anyone even speaks a word. Then, on a Friday afternoon, Mark called me into his office. His expression was polite, almost sympathetic, the way a doctor might speak to a patient before delivering bad news. "David, we appreciate your contributions," he said smoothly. "But moving forward, the company's needs have shifted. Today will be your last day." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. My last day? After everything I had given them? After the years of loyalty, the nights away from my family, the very system they were using to land the contract of the decade? I walked out with a cardboard box of my belongings, the weight of betrayal heavier than any monitor I had ever carried. In the lobby, I glanced at the TV mounted on the wall. Mark was there, smiling broadly, shaking hands with executives. The ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed the news. The company had secured the biggest contract in its history. The timing was no accident. They had fired me minutes before celebrating my work. If you were thrown out right before harvesting the fruits of your labor, what would you do? Walk away quietly? Or make sure the people who betrayed you paid the price? That night, I came home later than usual. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, the dinner untouched. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. The disappointment in her eyes was worse than anger. "You promised this would be different," she said softly. Before I could answer, my daughter rushed in, her cheeks streaked with tears. "You always lie, Daddy," she sobbed. "You say you'll be there, but you never are." She buried her face in my shirt, her small shoulders shaking. I held her, speechless, the truth of her words cutting deeper than any boardroom betrayal. For a long time after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. And in that silence, I felt the weight of every choice I'd made. I had traded birthdays and family dinners for a company that discarded me like trash. Then my phone buzzed. An email, unsigned, subject line blank. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "You were never meant to last here," it read. "Mark set you up months ago. The stolen ideas, the false reports, it was all part of the plan. Check the audit trail if you don't believe me." My hands shook as I clicked the attached file. Log entries, meeting notes, subtle changes in access permissions. It was all there, a trail of quiet sabotage stretching back months. Every suspicion I had ignored, every uneasy feeling I had brushed aside, was laid bare. I leaned back, my mind reeling. The betrayal hadn't been accidental or opportunistic. It had been orchestrated from the start, and at the center of it all was Mark, smiling in his expensive suit, shaking hands for cameras while carving the knife into my back. The realization was both devastating and clarifying. I hadn't just lost my job. I had been targeted, played like a fool, and discarded when I was no longer useful. I closed the laptop, my heart pounding. The question wasn't whether Mark had destroyed me. The question was whether I would let him get away with it. I didn't sleep the night I read that anonymous email. My mind replayed every late hour in the office, every idea stripped from me, every smile from Mark that now seemed like a mask. By dawn, I knew I couldn't just walk away. If he had orchestrated my downfall, then I would orchestrate his. The first step was simple: collect evidence. I had always been meticulous about backups, an old habit born from paranoia. Buried on a private drive were copies of code revisions, time-stamped commits, emails confirming features I had designed long before anyone else claimed them. One by one, I pieced together a narrative, each document a nail in the coffin of their lies. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Mark was powerful, and the company would protect him until the end. I needed leverage, something undeniable. That's when I turned back to the flaw in the system, the one I had discovered weeks before. It was still there, hidden in plain sight, a single vulnerability that could unravel the contract if triggered at the right moment. I spent long nights at my desk, setting up the failsafe. A line of code here, a hidden routine there. By the time I finished, the trap was woven so deeply into the architecture that no one could detect it without tearing the whole system apart. The ace up my sleeve, as my old mentor used to say, and yet I didn't activate it, not yet. The knowledge sat inside me like a loaded weapon. It gave me power, but also fear. What if I pulled the trigger too soon? What if innocent people who had once trusted me, paid the price? Then came the knock on my door. When I opened it, I almost slammed it shut again. Ryan stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red. For weeks, I had cursed his name, replaying the moment he had stolen my work. "I need to talk," he said. Every instinct told me to throw him out, but something in his voice, brittle and strained, made me pause. I let him in. "I didn't want to betray you," he said, sitting at my kitchen table. "Mark, he forced me. He said if I didn't play along, he'd ruin me. I have a family, David. Kids. I thought I could protect them by keeping my head down, but it was you who paid the price." His confession hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to rage, to accuse him of cowardice, but instead, I saw the same exhaustion in his face that I felt in mine. Another pawn sacrificed in Mark's game. If someone betrayed you under pressure, would you forgive them, knowing they were just another victim? For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and unresolved. Ryan left soon after, carrying his guilt with him. I wasn't ready to forgive him, But for the first time, I wondered if maybe he wasn't my enemy. Later that night, I sat with my daughter as she drew pictures at the coffee table. She asked me why I always looked so serious. I hesitated, then told her a story, not about contracts or betrayals, but about fairness. Being right isn't always enough, I said. Sometimes you have to fight for what's fair. Fairness matters more than winning. She nodded, not fully understanding, but I hoped the lesson would stay with her. It was a brief pause, a rare moment of peace in a storm that only grew darker. Because soon after, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Activity logs showed someone probing the system, as if searching for weaknesses. Not random, but targeted, like someone knew what I had done. Mark. He had to suspect me. The idea lodged itself in my brain, impossible to ignore. If he knew, then he wouldn't stop until he crushed me completely. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Heavy paper, embossed with the company's logo. My hands trembled as I tore it open. David Carter, it began. You are required to attend an emergency board session this Monday. Attendance is mandatory. I read it 3 times, my pulse thundering in my ears. They wanted me back inside their walls. Whether it was a trap, a test, or a reckoning, I couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain. The silent war I had begun was about to explode into the open. The boardroom felt more like a courtroom than a place of business. Rows of executives sat stiffly around the long mahogany table, their expressions sharp and calculating. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fear. I had been summoned like a criminal, and as soon as I entered, I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. David Carter, the chairman began, his voice clipped, rehearsed. You stand accused of falsifying reports, withholding data, and compromising the integrity of this company's operations. We have evidence, logs, communications, witness statements that all point directly to you. The words sliced through me, though I had expected nothing less. A screen lit up at the far end of the room, displaying doctored emails, manipulated timestamps, all carefully designed to make me look guilty. Every piece of evidence was a nail hammered into the coffin Mark had built for me. I could see Mark sitting smugly near the center of the table, his tailored suit impeccable, his hands folded as though he were the picture of reason. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he gave me a faint smile, the kind you'd give a beaten dog. For a moment, I considered silence. Let them bury me. Let the lie become the truth. But then, from the far end of the table, a voice broke through. I don't believe this. All heads turned. It was Evelyn, a mid-level manager who had once collaborated with me on a project years ago. She stood, trembling slightly, but her voice gained strength with each word. I've worked with David. He's meticulous, honest. If these reports show otherwise, then something doesn't add up. Someone is framing him. Her courage sent a ripple through the room. The executives exchanged wary glances. For the first time, the neat narrative Mark had constructed showed a crack. Mark's smile vanished. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't delude yourself, David. You were never more than a pawn, a tool. You've served your purpose, and now you're disposable. That's all you ever were. A replaceable cog in a machine too big for you to understand. Just a pawn. The words echoed in my head. If you were standing in my place, accused of crimes you didn't commit, your life dismantled piece by piece, would you stay silent, or would you fight back? I drew in a slow breath, forcing my racing heart to steady. "You think I didn't see this coming?" I asked quietly. "You think I didn't prepare?" Murmurs stirred around the table. Mark's eyes narrowed, but I didn't give him time to respond. I reached into my folder and slid a stack of papers across the polished wood. Here are the original time-stamped commits of the system, the true documentation. And if you still doubt me, maybe you should check the client portal. Confusion spread across the executives' faces. Mark's confidence faltered as he glanced at his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Then, almost in unison, several others did the same. A chorus of sharp intakes of breath followed. The contract, the crown jewel of the company's success, was gone. The system they had bragged about, the one they had built their future on, now displayed nothing but an empty shell. The data had vanished overnight. Mark shot up from his chair, his composure shattered. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was more damning than words. The board erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Some demanded an immediate investigation. Others panicked about shareholder fallout. In the middle of the storm, I stood calm, the only one in control. Later that evening, I walked into my daughter's room. She was already in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw me, she frowned. "You're late again." I sat beside her, pulling her small body into my arms. "I know, but I promise you this. Things are going to change. I'll be here more. I'll make it right." Her eyes searched mine, as if testing whether she could believe me. Then, slowly, she nodded and nestled against my chest. For the first time in months, I felt something other than rage. I felt the weight of what I was fighting for. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, my phone buzzed with alerts. News outlets were ablaze with headlines. Company's landmark contract in jeopardy. Anonymous leak sparks corporate crisis. Photos of Mark appeared on every screen, his face pale and drawn. No longer the picture of power. I stood in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the chaos I had unleashed. The storm had only just begun, and I was at its center. The collapse was faster than anyone expected. Within days of the contract disappearing, headlines screamed about negligence, fraud, and mismanagement. Government regulators announced an investigation, and the company's stock plunged so sharply that even the most loyal investors scrambled to dump their shares. Employees whispered in the hallways, the once proud headquarters now buzzing with fear instead of ambition. I watched from the outside, a ghost haunting the empire I had helped build. Every notification on my phone brought news of another blow. The CEO under questioning, partners suspending deals, clients withdrawing. The dominoes fell one after another, each toppling the next. Yet beneath the chaos, I sensed a pattern. Anonymous leaks emerged not just about my company, but about others too. Competitors, subsidiaries, even suppliers. The details were too precise to be coincidence. And then I saw it. Connections between contracts, shared board members, shadow shell companies. It dawned on me that Mark had never truly been the architect. He was only a pawn, a messenger carrying out orders for something larger, a hidden network pulling strings across the industry. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table piecing together documents, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mark, the man who had ruined me, standing on my doorstep. His perfect suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes hollow. Please, he said, his voice hoarse. You have to listen. I didn't know how deep this went. I thought I was in control, but I was nothing, just like you. I almost laughed at the irony. The man who once sneered that I was only a pawn now admitted he was one too. But when he dropped to his knees and whispered, "Forgive me," the laughter died in my throat. If someone begged you for forgiveness after destroying your life, would granting it make you weak, or would it make you stronger? I didn't answer him. I couldn't. The sight of him on the floor stirred both rage and pity. He had built the trap that nearly ended me, but now he was caught in one even larger. Later that night, I lay awake beside my wife, staring at the ceiling. She had seen the news, seen the company unravel, and she looked at me differently now, not with disappointment, but with quiet fear. "David," she whispered, "did you do this?" I hesitated. She didn't need the details. What mattered was that the man lying next to her was no longer the husband she had known. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't go back. The following morning, I walked my daughter to school. She held my hand, skipping along, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around us. Watching her laugh made me wonder, had I gone too far? In trying to punish those who wronged me, had I condemned others, innocent colleagues, struggling families, to ruin as well? That evening, Mark returned, this time not begging, but warning. He leaned close, his voice trembling. "You think you've won, but you don't understand. There's a group, powerful, invisible. They've been watching you ever since the contract vanished. They don't care about me anymore. They care about you." I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the fear in his eyes was real. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting Mark or even the company. I had walked into a battlefield I didn't recognize. Days later, the proof came. As I left the grocery store with my daughter, I noticed a man standing across the street. He wasn't buying anything, just staring. When our eyes met, he didn't flinch. He lit a cigarette, inhaled slowly, then turned and walked away. That night, while my family slept, I sat by the window, the shadows outside stretching long and heavy. I thought of the stranger, of Mark's warning, of the faceless organization pulling strings. My war had started as revenge against one man, one betrayal. But now, I realized, it was only the beginning of something much larger, and they knew exactly where I lived. Starting over was harder than I imagined, but not impossible. After weeks of silence and whispered threats, I finally accepted an offer from a mid-sized tech firm that promised something I had nearly forgotten existed: respect. The first day I walked into their offices, I was greeted not with suspicion, not with the cold stares of colleagues wondering if I'd fail, but with handshakes and genuine smiles. They had read about me in the papers, about the scandal that had taken down my old company. They didn't treat me as damaged goods. They treated me as someone who had survived. The longer I stayed, the more I realized why. The company had been founded by people who, like me, had once been crushed under the weight of men like Mark. Former employees who had been betrayed, silenced, discarded. Survivors who knew what it meant to be written off as expendable. Together, they had built something different. A workplace where loyalty wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a value to be honored. It was here, in this unexpected haven, that I finally began to breathe again. My work was respected, my contributions credited. For the first time in years, I felt seen. One crisp morning, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I walked my daughter to school on time. She clutched my hand, skipping along the sidewalk, her laughter echoing like music. I bent down, kissed her forehead at the gate, and watched her disappear into the crowd of children. That simple act brought more satisfaction than any contract, any paycheck, any hollow praise I had once chased. But just when I thought peace might finally be mine, my phone buzzed. A message, no sender, no subject, just 6 words glowing on the screen. The game has only begun. I stared at it for a long time, the morning sun suddenly colder. Back at the office, life carried on. The papers were filled with updates about my old company. The government had forced a sweeping reorganization. Entire departments were dismantled. Executives fled like rats, abandoning a sinking ship. And Mark? He was gone. No public statement, no farewell interview. He had vanished, swallowed by the shadows he had once served. But for me, the story wasn't finished. I had seen too much. Uncovered threads that led beyond Mark, beyond one corporation. There was a system, an invisible web of power, and I could no longer pretend it didn't exist. That was why, months later, I founded something new. A fund to protect workers who faced injustice in their jobs. Not a charity for sympathy, but a shield for survival. We offered legal aid, financial support, and, most importantly, a voice. If corporations thought employees were disposable, we would make them impossible to ignore. At night, though, I still felt the weight of eyes on me. The man who had stood across the street outside the grocery store haunted my memory. I half expected him to reappear, faceless in the crowd. And one evening, he did. I was walking home when I saw him leaning against a lamppost, his collar turned up against the wind. I stiffened, every muscle tense. But instead of approaching with menace, he raised his hand in a subtle greeting. "I'm not your enemy," he said, when I finally dared to confront him. His voice was calm, steady. "I've been watching because I needed to know if you were ready. There are others like you. People who've been wronged, silenced, destroyed. We're fighting the same war, David, against them." "Them?" I asked, though I already knew. "The organization pulling the strings. The one that used Mark, and now has its eyes on you." The revelation landed like a stone in my chest. All this time I had thought the stranger was a threat, but now I realized he might be an ally. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you've already proven you won't stay silent," he said simply, "and because they already fear you." That night, long after he had disappeared back into the shadows, I stood in my daughter's room, watching her sleep. The soft rise and fall of her breathing was the only thing anchoring me to something pure. I brushed her hair back from her forehead and whispered, "I kept my promise. I'm here. But there's another fight waiting, and this time, I can't walk away." She stirred slightly, clutching her stuffed rabbit, unaware of the storm outside. I kissed her cheek, straightened, and looked out the window at the city lights. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun.